You're listening to the official podcast of Asbury University, produced by students with God-honoring conversations that inform, edify, and encourage. This is Asbury. We explore culture and current topics through a Christian worldview, promoting a well-balanced life, and we empower our community to belong, become, and be set apart. I'm your host, Abby Lobb. Welcome to This is Asbury.
Hello, I'm Paul Nesselroade, professor of psychology and director of the honors program here at Asbury University. And it's my incredible privilege to sit down with historian and educator Christian Marx. Christian has previously worked as a nurse, as well as a historian and educator for the House of the Wannsee Conference. But since 2014, he's been employed at the Memorial for the Victims of Euthanasia Killings in the city of Brandenburg, Germany. There he works with exhibition projects as well as the development, implementation, and evaluation of profession-specific educational formats. And one of his chief duties is to work with Germany's rising medical professionals regarding the history of medicine during the time of the National Socialists. Point of personal privilege here. I first met Christian several years ago. We believe it was 2016 when I was taking students to Germany and Poland on Asbury's Holocaust Studies tour. I met him at where he works at the Brandenburg Memorial. And as a result of my interactions with him and the facilities there, it quickly became a staple, a centerpiece. In fact, really a starting point for the tour that I run with students. So, Christian, thanks so much for being here, for giving us a few moments of your time.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you for this invitation.
Absolutely. So we just have a few questions to get us started. Tell us more about what brought you to this area of study. I mean, it's not a topic that necessarily is very attractive. It's such a dark topic. But what brought you to say, okay, this is of interest to me, and I could become professionally involved in this?
So, first of all, I would say since my childhood, I was interested in history, ancient history, medieval history, even modern history. All that interested me my whole life since I went to primary school. And so one day I thought perhaps I can make a profession out of it. So I studied history, and quite soon I realized that the 20th century, and here especially National Socialism, is of big interest for me. And I realized that National Socialism forces us to question everything that has happened in the world up to then and since then. So it is a very important decade to understand, because this regime completely questioned the dignity of being human at all. So it questions nearly everything that happened in modern history since the last 200-300 years, to say that. And so finally, as a consequence, I think, this is my perspective, this means that we cannot understand the world if we cannot explain National Socialism. That doesn't mean that we are able to explain everything, of course not, but we should try as hard as we can.
Yeah. So it seems like an important hinge point in history then, such that depending on how certain questions were answered, we could imagine very different worlds after that. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, I think I share that interest. That's what brought me to this topic as a non-historian. Yeah, there are, of course, across Germany and Poland, there are lots of Holocaust memorials and study centers, and these places mark what happened there, that place, and how perpetrators brutally treated victims. But you work at Brandenburg, and probably most people have not heard of Brandenburg, but yet it's very important. Can you tell us why the story of what happened at Brandenburg is so significant in the larger narrative of the Holocaust?
First of all, Brandenburg, as you already said, is nearby Berlin, so it's in the heart of Germany. It's in between the normal German life in those years, in those days. And so it's very interesting to understand what happened there. In the end of 1939, the responsible persons who were organizing this euthanasia program, that means to kill 10,000 of German people. They decided to install the very first killing facility in that town, Brandenburg. So this is the very first one. It started to kill these people with handicaps, people with psychiatric diseases, so-called antisocial persons. These are the main groups, to kill them. And so this was the first killing facility. The second point is to make that clear. This is the place of the very first gas chamber on German ground. And this in the beginning of 1942. To make that clear, when did the Holocaust started? That was in the second half of 1941. So this is a place where all these developments started as nearly after the occupation of Poland. This is extremely early, just to make that point. And third point is, this is the place of the very first systematic mass murder against the Jewish population in Germany. So what we know today is that at that site there were about 9,000 people killed by the responsible persons of the Euthanasia program, and since now we have about 8,000 people that could be identified. And so we know that among these 8,000 victims have been 800 Jewish. So that means 10% of the identified victims have been Jewish. To compare this with another number, in 1933 there was a census, and the result was that only 0.9% of the German population had Jewish roots. So if we compare these two numbers, it makes clear how huge the number of Jewish victims have been. And so to say that clearly, the people then were killed because they were inmates of psychiatric clinics, but in the same moment they have been Jewish. And starting in summer 1940, they killed them only because they were Jews. That means this is kind of prelude to the Holocaust starting in summer 1940. And the last thing I should mention is that a lot of perpetrators of the euthanasia program, there have been 6 facilities all over Germany and Austria. Many of them, we have 500 perpetrators working in this program, and about 120 of them, only from Brandenburg, 21 of them, went as responsible perpetrators to the Holocaust. They organized and were ruling 3 extermination camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. So there's a direct connection between euthanasia and the Holocaust.
Fascinating. I think some people think that the Holocaust was fully conceived, but it wasn't. We had to develop it. And so what happened at Brandenburg, both in terms of the methods that were experimented upon and the personnel, have a direct connection then with the more industrial, large, massive undertaking that was going to unfold in the East. When you share your work at the memorial with groups of people, what are you learning about how they are processing this history? Is this getting through? And how have you learned sort of to help it get through?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's clear for us as the staff who works at the memorial, for those who work in the education department, that we work on a subject that is really, really hard. And we are aware of this. So that means, for example, when they come to see our memorial and when we work together with them, that means we work together them for about 4 or 5 or 6 hours the whole day. So what we think is the best way is that we open a space. That means we open our minds and we talk to them, and we open the ability to try something, to discuss something, to explore something. That means we open the space that we try to get into contact, into the conversation. What happened here? What does that mean? We don't tell the participants that happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So we are primarily asking, why did that happen? Who was responsible? Why did they take part? And what is very, very important, were there any possibilities to refuse to become a part of this crime? And this is very important for them. So we have some we always work with sources. This is all sources based, that we can prove that there have been, for example, physicians, but as well nurses that refused to take part. And so we try to compare those who took part, and to make that clear, they usually did that frankly, on a free will, And with those who said in 1940 or 41, in that moment, no, I don't take part. And we try to find out which motivations on both sides we can reconstruct on the basis of sources. And this is the changing point. Most often during that day that the students, the trainees, the pupils realize, oh, even among a regime of terror, it is always possible to find a narrow road. It is very narrow, no doubt about that. But nevertheless, it was possible. And it's proved that there's a narrow way to find a way out of that and not to become a perpetrator and not to become a part of a system that kills men, women, and children.
Fascinating. And I think that that's a misconception that most of us have, is that this was something that was forced. And having gone through some of what you do with my students, the primary materials that you expose us to, the testimony in courts and the people's claims, it really brings that out, doesn't it? That this was, yes, there are pressures, and I like the way you put it, narrow road, meaning that there are pressures for sure.
Absolutely.
But it was not something that they had to do.
No.
And so that then, I think, prompts us to ask serious questions, because I think it's a lot easier for us to explain it to ourselves if we were to say, well, there was some huge power structure that made it impossible to do anything else.
Of course, there was the will of the regime when they were asking, whom were they asking? This is another point. They were usually asking physicians or nurses that had been member of the National Socialist Party. We know that about 70% of all perpetrators were members of one of the National Socialist organizations. So they were highly organized in this National Socialist movement. So the regime could think that those who they were asking them directly, would you take part? Because we were thinking that you belong to us. And so, yes, and we have a quote, one of these physicians who was a part of this killing system in Brandenburg. His name was Dr. Heinrich Bunke. After the war, he was in front of a court and he was asking, were you forced? And he answered nearly, I can quote this nearly word by word, no, I wasn't forced. I always had the chance to say no. He was asked, why did you say yes? He said, well, I was thinking whether how should I react to this proposal? He speaks about a proposal. It was an offer to take part. It was no order. And he says, well, I was thinking what is good for this is my word, career. Yes. He doesn't use the word career, but he makes it clear. This is what is good for my career. So I decided to say yes. And this is very, very good to realize that for this moment they were not forced.
Thank you. Wow. Well, as you said, your work is very hard, but so important. I think that as we try to bring our time to a close, I want to take advantage of something a bit more exciting and uplifting. In our conversations, I've learned that you were living in Berlin when, and I'll use quotation marks, when the wall came down. Obviously, It didn't come down, but when in the fall, I think it was November of 1989.
Right.
And so I'm sure our listeners would love to hear just a little bit about what that experience was like.
Well, first of all, it still gets me goosebumps when I remember that night. I was in Berlin, and I was together with friends, and we were celebrating a birthday of one of our friends. We were sitting in the kitchen. I think it was a Thursday evening, Thursday night, and we were sitting together, we're talking, laughing, hearing music, and then something happened. It was an experience like in a theater. Some of those friends just crashed into the kitchen, opened the door, and was shouting, the wall came down. And we were all looking at each other. We were looking at him as if he became mad. And then somebody was getting up, and we had no internet, we hadn't phones. So he switched on the radio, and we have live records from what happened at Checkpoint Charlie, what happened at all the other checkpoints all around and within the city of Berlin. You know, Berlin was divided in its inner city. So we all knew these checkpoints. And then we heard all these live conferences from these checkpoints. And Then we switched on the TV because we wanted to see it. Just within 30 seconds, we were switching on the TV, and then we saw it, and we couldn't believe what we saw. It was unbelievable. Thousands of people from East Berlin came over to our West Berlin. I was fortunately living in West Berlin. So the party was over, and then the party on the street began.
Yeah, I'm sure. You just had to go out into the street.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine there's just astonishment and be on everyone's face as they're trying to process what is going on. And just to put a cap on this, you had the good fortune, right, of being at the right place at the right time when you found a camera thrust in your face from, was it CNN?
Right, it was CNN. It was
Tell
a
us
CNN
a little bit
team.
about that.
That was really, really exciting. Berlin was crowded in those days, in the first days, because the whole world came to Berlin. People from East Germany came all to West Berlin. Some West Berliners went to East Berlin to see the first time for them. East Berlin, not all went to East Berlin, so they the first chance to see that. And so many people from all over the world came to Berlin. So the streets were crowded, really crowded. And then in this crowd, anywhere, I saw somebody falling down on the ground, and I helped this gentleman coming up. And then I realized he was an American, and he was looking at me and said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome." And he asked me, "Are you from West Berlin?" And I said, "Yes, I'm from West Berlin." "Oh, I'm from CNN. Can I make an interview with you?" I was so surprised, and I just said immediately yes. And then camera on, tone, and then I had a camera in my face, and he was asking me several questions. And this is very interesting. He asked me, and this was a changing point from my perspective. He asked me just 2 days after the wall came down, "What do you think about reunification?" And I was astonished because I didn't think about this up to that second. That word was not in my mind, but I think it was a need that somebody from outside who had a better look than me or we on the whole situation, and asked me, isn't this the chance? And I was astonished, and I didn't know really how to deal with that. And so after, as you know, the result of all that was the reunification.
Wow, I can only imagine what that must have been like to be in that city at that time. Yeah.
I will never forget my whole entire life, that moment, these moments. This is an example, and this is what I still remember so well, and this is what I would like to say other people all around in the United States, everywhere. This is an example, when people have enough about their regime, and East German government was a terrible regime, when they get rid of it, then there's something like a changing point. So that was a changing point. To make that clear, we were not aware that this was a changing point in world's history because we were too near.
Well, thank you, Christian. I want to thank you for your time here. I want to thank you for your work. I've always been very grateful for how you treat students. You treat each person very genuinely and carefully. And, of course, the work you do is so very important. So, and thank you for coming so far to come
It was a long journey, but I think it's worth to do. Absolutely.
Well, thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll look forward to hearing more from you with your talk here soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of This is Asbury. To learn more about Asbury University, visit asbury.edu.